Hey everyone, my name is Paul. This is my camper, and I just want to make a quick video on how I installed a second battery and what my system looks like. It's pretty simple, but yeah, let's get into it. Oh, also, this is a 2006 Ford E-Series Econoline van. It's a E350. My battery that I'm using is a deep cycle lead acid battery. Picked it up from O'Reilly. I think it's a 90 amp hour battery. It was 110 bucks, so it was pretty cheap. But let me show you what's going on. Oh, it's 90 degrees today, so it's freaking hot. So as you can see under a hood, this is the main battery, and there's no room for a second battery at all. I think on the older vans, this fuse box was mounted somewhere else and there was a battery right here. But luckily they made this box right under here. Right there. So this is the battery box. Because the battery I installed is a little bit bigger than the box, I had to drop it down. Unfortunately for this box, it is a bit of a pain in the butt to service the battery. You do have to put a jack under here, unbolt 2 bolts. There's 2 more on the other side, and then lower it down. It does come with these cables on both sides to help keep it at least mounted to the frame. Eventually, I think what I want to do is install a couple of hood lifts, hydraulic hood lifts, both sides. That way it could drop and lift a little bit easier. But I mean, it's not that bad. You know, lead acid batteries, you don't want them to being inside the actual vehicle. So I've got some 4-gauge wire, negative and positive. Now I did not need to travel this negative wire from the battery all the way up and into the negative shunt. All I had to do is disconnect it or connect it from the negative post to the frame, and it would have been perfectly fine. For some reason I did it this way. Got some 4-gauge positive wire. I actually found this gauge or this positive wire at the junkyard from my retired MedStar vehicle. It cost me 10 bucks and it was roughly 12 feet, and I found 2 of them. I didn't want to drill any more holes. Luckily there was a hole right here. I drilled a couple holes in this grommet, fed it through this grommet, and it comes up this step. So this step is made so there's plenty of space on the bottom. There's also plenty of space on the side. So these wires and this inline fuse do not interrupt the step at all, nor do they get crushed. Now, of course, you need an inline fuse. I've got a 250 amp inline fuse right here. This goes up through here. This is where the negative wire is. And this bundle of wires is actually for the LED light strip I've got that I can connect some LED lights outside the van, you know, when I'm camping or going to music festivals. I'll show you guys how that works in a bit. But yeah, the positive and negative come up through here, come up through here, come up over here. Usually the rug sits over it like so. Comes up over here and goes into my electrical setup. So initially, my first option was to put my auxiliary battery, or not my auxiliary battery, but my electrical setup underneath the bed. But I just didn't feel comfortable with all that electrical work and electromagnetic waves sitting underneath the bed while I'm trying to sleep. I just feel like it may keep me up at night. So I wanted to put it as far away from the bed as I could. So I put it over here. I just connected this door. Initially, I was gonna put it in a box, but the DC to DC charger and eventually an inverter, they need to be able to breathe properly. So I just kept it open like this. Pretty simple. I like the way it turned out. But let me move this seat and then we'll dig right into it. So this is the system I've got, or the setup I should say. This is just a Milwaukee battery charger. I've got a tester right here so I can test anything I need to. But we'll start off with the positive 4-gauge wire coming from the second battery. I've got it coming up through this hole right here. It connects into the right side of the switch. This switch enables me to connect and disconnect the second battery. As you can see, it's completely disconnected. If I need to service anything, connected. Of course, whenever I turn it off, always test with the test light. The last thing you want to do is short something out or cause a fire. Next, this 4-gauge wire comes from the switch up and over and into this positive shunt. Now this shunt has proper voltage from the second battery. Okay, now let's go to the negative. Now this negative wire, like I said, I did not have to go from the battery all the way up through here. I could have gone from the battery to the subframe, maybe drilled in a screw right here or right here like this one it is, and connected it over here. For some reason, I did it this way. But this negative wire, it doesn't go to the shunt, it actually goes to the the battery monitor. This is an inline 500 amp fuse for the Renogy battery monitor. This connects up to this. Then on the other end, you got the same 4-gauge negative wire going into the shunt. Now for the inline fuse Renogy, the inline fuse 250 amp inline fuse underneath the step back there, the shunt positive and negative, and then the switches, they have studs that require you to use, I believe, a 1/2-inch eyelid. So eyelid connects the wire to the stud, wire to the stud, wire to the stud. So these eyelids need to be 1/2-inch for these shunts, switch, and inline fuses. So now that the second battery is installed, we've got an inline fuse underneath the seat or underneath the step. We've got our switch, power to the shunt, ground to the Renogy battery charger or battery monitor, and the negative shunt. Now we will continue on to the Renogy battery monitor. So this inline 500 amp fuse and controller, I would assume, is all hooked up negative wise. Now we need the positive. This wire came with the kit. I don't know what gauge it is, maybe 12. This coming from the positive shunt, which has proper voltage, into this controller / inline fuse. Next, we've got this wire right here, which is actually for the monitor. So this monitors the percentage of battery life, how many amp hours are left, voltage. I usually just keep an eye on the voltage. These lead acid deep cycle batteries should not go below 10.5 volts, I believe. So I usually just watch this. And now that we've got the battery monitor all set up, let's go to the DC to DC charger. So to start from there, we need to go underneath the hood. So normally you could hook it up to any 12 volt source. It has to be constant 12 volt. If you're not quite sure, make sure the key is out of the ignition, grab yourself a test light. And what I did was I found out that this is a constant 12 volt, which is at the fuse box. So I connected the positive wire for the DC to DC charger at this point. So this is a 3/8 eyelid. This is an 8-gauge wire, and this is an inline fuse, 30 amps. I connected it from there to this inline fuse, which goes to this. This is where I joined 2 different 8-gauge wires, and then it goes through the firewall. So that 8-gauge positive wire comes in through there. There was already a hole in the firewall from when I bought the vehicle, so I just fed it through there. Goes underneath this mat right down here, underneath this step, because like I said, there's plenty of room. Comes up through here, and underneath this box where the electrical system is. Oh, check out this new rock I got. Amethyst. Pretty cool, huh? Add that to my collection. Also, I will get into the diagram that I used. You know, that way you guys have a better understanding of what's needed. You know, what size wire you need, what size amp fuses you need. And of course, every system's different. So, you know, your gauge of wire and inline fuses will differ. So that main battery 8-gauge wire coming from the fuse box underneath the hood comes up to this hole right here, comes up right here, comes up over here and into this switch. So now we got a switch for the DC to DC charger. Right now it is switched off just because I'm not using it and I don't need to keep, you know, charging the system when it's not even drawing power. Then we got another 8-gauge wire coming from the switch to the DC to DC charger. Now that we've got power, let's hook up the ground. So instead of going from the shunt to the DC to DC charger, I connected a screw to the frame of the van. This comes down. This is 8-gauge. Comes up, actually this is not 8-gauge. This is 10-gauge. Yes, 10-gauge. This comes up through here, through this hole that I made, up through here and into the DC to DC charger. Now we will continue on to the power negative. This is power. I've got a 25 amp inline fuse. This is also 8-gauge. Comes over here, comes down through here, down through here, up and over here, up and over, and into the positive shunt. So we completed the circuit. Now we gotta hook up the ground. I put a little sleeve over this ground wire just because I was zip tying it to some positive wires. It comes up through here, over here, and where do you think it leads to? Negative shunts. All right, now this is complete other than these two wires here. So now that the power and negative supply are hooked up to the DC to DC charger, we want to make sure we are properly charging the system. So we got a couple wires here that control into the back. If you get a DC to DC charger, always read the instructions. I've got two wires here. These are 16-gauge wires connected into this section here. These two lead through the back into this hole, down through there, underneath the step. So they come underneath this step right here, come up through here, move this, move that, slide that back. And then we've got one connecting in, actually both are connecting in to a section in the fuse box that only has power when I believe the vehicle is running. So if you got a Ford E-Series van, it's fuse spot 19. It's not in use, but it does have power coming to it. Some of these spots are for different vans and applications. So I used my test light, found out that there was power going to that section, and I pretty much just made a little connection, fused the two together, made a connection, and it's in there pretty good. So you know, read the instructions and get yourself a test light. If you got a Ford E-Series van, it'd be fuse spot number 19. Now the only reason why you need to hook these two wires up are so that the DC to DC charger can actually turn on and off with the engine, so that you're not, pulling power from the main battery to charge the second battery when the key is just in the ignition and the vehicle's not running. So like I said, make sure you read the instructions, get yourself a test light, and the easiest way to connect these two wires is directly into the fuse box. Now that we've got proper charge, we've got a monitor, we've got the second battery, let's get into the fuse box. Now this fuse box is it is for different applications that I want to hook up. So like this wire right here, that's a negative. This is a positive for a cigarette lighter that I wired up into the back over there so I can charge my phone or flashlights or whatever from the bed. This blue wire right here, negative, positive. This is for the LED light strip that I used for festivals and camping outside the van. So I got a couple fuses here. 15 amp, this is for the cigarette lighter. 3 amp, this is for the LED strip. Now for the cigarette lighter, because it's pulling more amperage, it needs a thicker wire. I believe this is 12 gauge. Yeah, 12 gauge, and the blue wire is not pulling a whole lot of amperage. 3 amps is the max. So this is 16 gauge. So I've got negative and positive right here. Got the fuse. Now if this fuse is pulled, this is not gonna work. So if your lights or whatever don't work, check your fuse, see if it's blown. This goes up through here, goes up that in the back, connects to here, and then goes underneath that step. So those two wires come up through here, got negative and positive. I made this bundle so that I can actually pull this wire out pretty far. If I wanted to set up the lights in the back of the van, I could. It comes up through here, and this is the connection. I plug it in, and then I plug in the lights, and now I've got power to the lights. And there's another roll of strips in here so I could hook up too. And it actually doesn't draw a whole lot of power, so it definitely it's definitely pretty cool. I'll show you a little video of what it looks like. And yeah, I'm not drawing any power, but I did order some lights so I can, start hooking stuff up. That way I can put my battery to work, put my system to work, test some things out. I'll get into a little diagram here and a few of the items that I used and needed. Eventually, I started buying stuff about a year ago, stuff here and there. A couple things that I bought that I should not have were some wires that were actually aluminum and copper clad. You do not want to use aluminum and copper clad. Aluminum is not a good conductor. Copper is, so get pure copper wire, and preferably pure copper eyelids. Eyelids are what you connect from the wire to either the little terminals on the box, eyelids to connect the wires to the shunt, the switch, inline fuses from here, and and at the DC to DC charger. Those are eyelets. But I, made some extra space. I want to put an inverter right here. And then I also want to mount this Milwaukee charger right here so that I can charge my Milwaukee batteries. But yeah, this is my setup. I'm gonna go over the diagram, go over a few of the items I used, and we'll go from there. So this is the diagram I based my setup off of. This came from Moser Makes. He did a really good job of making this diagram, which really actually definitely helped out. I did change a few things around because of my setup. I'm not using his DC to DC charger. I'm not using the type of energy battery he's using, so the gauge wire that he used is different from what I used, such as, of course, I used a 250 amp inline fuse from the second battery, but I did not use a 2 or 0 gauge wire because of the type of power I'm pulling and supplying. So I used 4 gauge instead. Same with the negative, I used 4 gauge instead of a fuse box, which is for the DC to DC charger, second battery, etc. I'm using shunts. So because I'm using shunts, I need to put inline fuses, which are right here. Now for the DC to DC charger, I did use 8 gauge wire, so that was the same. I think the only thing that was different was the gauge of wire from the second battery, and I believe a couple of the inline fuses because of the power being supplied and drawn from the DC to DC charger. But yeah, this is the diagram that I used. It definitely helped out. Something to keep in mind, this is an 8 gauge eyelid. If you use 4 gauge eyelids, which is for the second battery, which I showed you over there at the van, or a 0 or 2 gauge, they're going to be a lot bigger than this. Okay, a normal crimping tool like this will not work to crimp this. So you'll have to buy a special tool to crimp it. I don't have that special tool, so what I used was a hydraulic press to push them down. But yeah, I hope this video is helpful. Probably be more helpful for those who have a small system, and especially if you have a Ford E-Series van. If you do have a Ford E-Series van, do you have any questions on mounting locations or just the battery box itself, and let me know. But yeah, this is my second battery electrical setup. As soon as my lights come in, I'll make a video on how I installed those, and I'll catch you guys around. Peace.